Hey guys, welcome to the Best Practices Show, where we take a look at the best business practices from the best dental practices all over the world. And boy, do I have a treat for you today. I've got one of my great friends back on the show, and some of you have seen him before, David Harris. He's such a great expert key opinion leader on so many thoughts. And today we're going to be talking about best financial practices so that you can actually keep the money you earn in dentistry. So you're going to want to watch this or listen to this wherever you're consuming podcasts. Grab a pen and hit the share button. Sit back. You're going to love this. Now, if you're joining us for the first time, I want to do two things. Number one, I just want to welcome you to a very welcoming type of community where we're always committed to just learning here. So there's no egos here. We're just all on the same page, just trying to learn what's really working and what's not working in dentistry so you can have a better practice and a better life. Also, if the second thing I want to do is if you're listening to this or watching this, make sure you just hit the subscribe button below, because I want to make sure that you keep getting the updates you're going to see every single week. We're bringing you a brand new expert, key opinion leader, and best practices in dentistry. We just want to make sure that this is a great journey for you all along the way. And lastly, we take a lot of notes here. So you'll see everything David and I talk about, we'll have them in the show notes. So I don't care if you're listening on Spotify, iTunes, wherever, just click the show notes part of it, and it'll expand, and you'll see actual links on how you can contact David, some of the references he might mention. So it'll all be right there. We want to make learning as easy as possible for you. So David, I love having you on here. You and I have known each other for a couple of years. We got to know each other even more through all of the speaking and consulting and ADMC networks. And you came on I'm like, okay, I know this guy's brilliant, but every single time, and I mean this sincerely every time I listen to you, every time I talk, I learn so much. And now I know who you are. I know a lot of listeners know who you are. But if somebody's hearing you for the first time, who is David Harris? Tell us who you are.
Well, I like to think that I have the most fun job in dentistry some days, because what my company does is we chase and catch people who steal from dentists.
Okay, so that doesn't sound like fun to me, but it does. Now, I want to talk about the why. Okay, now some people think, oh, this is never going to happen to me, or it's not a big deal. And when it does, it destroys them emotionally. How big of a problem is embezzlement in dentistry?
It's huge. Something like 80% of dentists will get embezzled sooner or later.
Wow.
And partly it's the financial consequences, and the average amount that a thief gets away with when they steal from a dentist is a little over $100,000.
That is a lot of dough.
It's a lot of dough. But what's worse for a lot of dentists is what happens to them emotionally when they get stolen from. Kirk, that the way dental offices work, they tend to be small places with a few staff, and people kind of get to be like family. And this is a very personal crime. It's not like you park your car in a bad part of town and you go away for a couple of hours, and when you come back, the window's been smashed and your briefcase is gone. Mm-hmm. This is a crime that's committed by somebody who was at your daughter's wedding 3 months ago. And it's personal, and that part's hard on dentists. You asked me what's fun about my job. That's not the fun part. The fun part, or the interesting part, is the chess game that we play with embezzlers. And I was talking to somebody yesterday, and I said, yeah, it's kind of like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle when somebody keeps hiding the pieces on you.
Wow.
And every one of my team, and we've got 19 investigators, every one of them says the same thing. The rush that I get when I find that missing piece and it falls into place in the puzzle is pretty strong.
Wow. This is such a huge topic. And I want to go back to this. You mentioned 80% get embezzled, but I've heard you talk about the second time around, because people get embezzled the second time. And then you also have $1 million club, right? Like people that have stolen more than $1 million. So I don't want to create a lot of fear here. That's not the point. The point is that this is real. So talk about the second time around, and then the magnitude. There are some people that are professional thieves.
Yeah, there's the $1 Million Club, and there's also the group that we call serial embezzlers. And these are people who have stolen in 2 or 6, or in one case, 15 practices. And dentistry's allowed itself to get out of step with the rest of the world in terms of how it screens people before they get hired. And I know that's something you and I have had some good chats about over the years. But that really facilitates these serial embezzler people.
Yeah.
And you know, the worst thing a dentist can do in terms of setting themselves up for embezzlement is hire somebody who knows how to do it. I mean, there's a big enough chance that somebody who already works for you and has a clean background will sooner or later decide to steal. But when you hire somebody who's done it in the past, it's inevitable.
Yeah.
And sorry, you asked me a question before that and it just vanished from my mind.
That's okay. I got a million here, like ready to go. Cause we're big fans of big best practices, and you and I were talking about this. And today we're going to be talking about best financial practices. So, and I hear this, I'm sure you've heard this, I talk to a lot of young dentists and they're 32, 33, and they're like, I don't even have time to walk by the front desk. I have no idea what's happening up there. If I'm a young dentist watching this, Dave, where do I even start? I'm going to buy a practice. I'm going to inherit the team that's with the practice in most occasions. Like when you're talking about best financial practices, I mean, give us some scope of where we would even start at like the first step.
Absolutely. So your audience know this. Almost every practice is computerized. They all have something called practice management software, which could be Dentrix or EagleSoft or Curve or Open Dental or OrthoTrack. And that software does a lot of things. I mean, it keeps the appointment book, it keeps clinical notes, but it also runs the financial backbone of the practice. And one of the things that it keeps track of is how much money it was told was collected today and what form that money takes. And the really, really basic step, which in my experience, about 35% of dentists don't do, is to compare how much money the software says was collected with what went in the bank.
Wow.
If that isn't done, what you're doing is you're opening the door to the stupidest, laziest thief on the planet. Okay? If you don't know how much money your software said was collected, then whether you take the deposit to the bank or you let a staff member do that, you suffer from the same problem. You don't know how much that deposit should have been.
Right.
And that opens the door to anybody to stick their fingers in your cookie jar and take your cookies. So there needs to be some concept in the head of the dentist of here's how much money should be going in the bank according to the practice management software. Now, there's a second possibility, which is that the software is lying to you, and I'll get there in a minute. But that basic comparison between software and bank, needs to happen. Now, here's the good news, and I'll go back to the 32-year-old new practice owner who you mentioned a minute ago, who doesn't have time to use the restroom, let alone any of the financial stuff. The good news is this is something that can be outsourced. In other words, the dentist doesn't have to do it herself or himself. They just need to know that it needs to happen. And when I say outsource, just so there's no misapprehension on the part of the audience, what I mean by that is that we need to get a third party who's not in the office to do the reconciliation. Somebody like an external bookkeeper.
Okay.
This can't be something that your office manager or your receptionist does, because that's kind of like handing the fox the keys to the hen house.
Right. Right. And I know you're always careful about this, and I appreciate that. By listening to this, we're not going to make thieves better thieves. But also the reality of this is most of our audience are dentists, and most of them own their own practice. And you've been there, I've been there, where you have Judy up front. Judy's the sweetest person ever. Now, if I start putting in a system of checks and balances, what it's going to scream is, I don't trust her. And so we have to kind of separate the idea between this is best business practice and trust. I mean, I feel like people misdefine trust. Do you know what I mean? I have teenage daughters. They say, don't you trust me? I go, I trust you all the time. I'm always going to verify what time you got home. So what would you say about the whole trust thing? Like, you hear that.
I do. And I'll say a couple of things. First of all, the way that humans deal with trust is interesting. When you meet somebody very early on in the relationship, you kind of ask yourself the question, can I trust this person? And once you answer that question, you lock it up and you never, ever revisit it. In other words, we tend to view trust as kind of this static concept when really it needs to be a little bit more dynamic. And there are lots of people who were worthy of your trust at some earlier date and aren't now. Mm-hmm. People's lives change. People change emotionally. How they process certain things change. And all those things mean that trust is something that needs to be reevaluated. But I will go back to what you said. Dental practices tend to run like very amateurish businesses in general. And, the fact that most dental employees get hired without going through a drug test, as an example, just astounds me, because most businesses, particularly those that handle medication, would not do that.
Yeah.
So there's a level of casualness or informality there. And the same thing applies to money. A lot of dentists didn't choose that career because they really had a burning desire to be a business owner. They're healers first and business people have sometimes a very distant second. And that's okay. But to run your business like a business should not be an evil thing or something that gets your staff mad at you.
Yeah.
If they don't like that, I'm starting to question their agendas.
That is so interesting. I never thought about the drug testing. I got a friend who has a juicing company. He drug tests everybody. It's a juicing. They make juices,
Yeah, I mean, FedEx drug tests everybody. And they don't have prescription pads in the vans.
Yeah.
The way dental practices do in the operatories.
Wow.
So there's this kind of country club culture in dentistry that is starting to show its limits. Mm-hmm. And this isn't something we deal with, but when you look at the number of cases of medication abuse by dental staff, and it could be anything from taking drugs and selling them for street value to, drug addiction that they have personally or whatever. I mean, it happens a lot.
Right.
And it happens in part because dentists just assume that everybody who's there working with them is as altruistic as the dentist is and is there for all the right reasons.
Yeah. I love this. So starting with an outsourcing third party that's just got a separate set of eyes. Now I want you to go back to the opening up, because I had my credit card, somebody got my credit card number, and then I called the company and they said what they do is they test. So it's a test charge. And then if it goes through, then they go for a bigger one, then they go for a bigger one and bigger one. And then during the afternoon, you could see whoever had my credit card, they were going for bigger and bigger purchases in a row. And is that kind of the same thing you see a little bit?
It is. Sometimes embezzlement, I think, started by accident. So somebody did something that, caused extra money to be in the doctor's books, for example, and they kind of said, they didn't even necessarily realize that would be the consequence of what they did. And once it is, they kind of say, oh, that's interesting. And they sit there and they wait for a little while to see if anybody notices. And after that, that grace period, which might be a month or possibly 2 months, after that, they're back doing it again, but now it's deliberate. Or, somebody tries that first experimental transaction to see if they will be caught. And when they realize they won't, then they start stealing. And it's exactly what you said. The theft tends to grow over time and eventually plateau. And embezzlers are usually pretty good at sensing out what the doctor's pain point is.
Yeah. And they're not dumb people either.
No.
They're very smart.
Well, some of them are pretty average. But regardless, there's almost inevitably a knowledge gap between the staff member and the doctor in certain areas, and not in the doctor's favor.
Right.
I have a lot of people who call me, and they do a lot of blaming of themselves for this. If only I had done A, B, or C, I wouldn't be calling you right now. And I have to say to them, now your model of the embezzler is a little bit oversimplified.
Right.
There's no one magic pill. There's no one thing that you could have done that would have thwarted every possible means they could have come up with to steal from you. And I tell them they shouldn't feel bad about losing a very unequal battle.
Yeah.
And a lot of them feel a little bit better from when I say that. But yeah, they tend to feel like I have more education than this person. My IQ is probably higher than theirs, and therefore, in a battle of wits, I should prevail.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just not that simple.
Okay.
These folks know a lot more than the doctor about the things that are relevant to stealing.
Right. Now I want to go back because I love this topic. Like, I'm fascinated by it. Just go a little bit deeper on what outsourcing really means. I know you guys do this, but if I were a dentist and I was going to outsource a separate set of eyes, would that be my bookkeeper purely? Because most people are going to go, well, that's a bookkeeper. Is it a bookkeeper?
It could be your bookkeeper. It could be your spouse, if your spouse is amenable to this. It could be your former office manager who used to work in the practice and retired and doesn't mind spending, 4 or 5 hours a month on a paid basis to do some things for you. It could be your CPA. It could be somebody in the consulting realm. The important thing is it can't be staff.
Okay.
And let's talk about the job that we're asking this person to do.
Yes.
And it's really pretty simple. Once a month, get reports from your practice management software that show how much money the software says was collected. And software always breaks it down into different forms. So, this much cash, this much checks, this much in credit card payments, and so on. And reconcile that against what happened at the bank. The challenge in doing this is there are some timing differences. For example, if a patient comes in and pays by credit card, your software records that today, but it probably won't hit your bank account for a couple of days because there's a little processing lag that happens.
Right.
So the person doing this work needs to deal with a couple of little timing issues. When you do this a month at a time, as opposed to trying to do it every single day, a lot of that timing stuff sorts itself out.
Right.
Which makes it easier. So really what the person doing this look over needs to do is to make sure that the amount that went into the bank is what the software said it should be.
Right.
And like I say, if you're not looking at that, then the most unimaginative, unmotivated thief can still steal from you.
Yeah.
As soon as you look at that, embezzlement still happens, but you've upped the ante considerably, because now to steal, what somebody's going to have to do is they're going to have to teach your software to lie.
Okay. Yeah. Now we're going to go back to this, because again, I love this. Just like you said, it's a country club atmosphere. It's not really well-run business. I'm a dentist. I'm trying to be a nice guy. How do I share this with a new team member I've just hired? Say, look, we're going to have a separate set of eyes on everything. Just want to let you know up front. It's part of the expectation in here, or, give me some coaching on that. How would I communicate?
Well, the first question is, do they need to know it all?
Okay. Good question.
And I'm not sure they do.
Right.
In other words, this isn't somebody who comes into your practice and does this. Typically, this stuff can all be done from 1,000 miles away if you want.
Right.
So, I'm not sure you necessarily need to tell your staff anything.
Right.
And, you know, if people are going to steal, I want to encourage them to take the easiest way out, because that's the easiest one to find.
Right.
In other words, why would we ever say to a staff member, you know what, I'm looking at you, so you really need to up your game here if you're going to steal.
Wow.
That sounds like a gauntlet that just shouldn't be tossed.
No, it shouldn't. It shouldn't.
So I'm not sure you have to say anything.
Okay.
But if you did, you would just say that, you know, my CPA insists that we do our bookkeeping monthly.
Yep.
And, you know, we keep our stuff up to date so that I'm not showing up at her office, you know, 3 days before the tax filing date with a shoebox saying, make some sense of this stuff.
Right. Now I have a whole bunch of weird stuff going on in my head as you're saying all this, because I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm seeing things. I've been doing this for more than 23 years. And dentistry is full of amazing people. It's an incredibly noble profession. And then you've got this small segment. You're like, oh my gosh. And a dentist will keep a team member. I've always thought to myself, the best team members love accountability. They love it. They love people that don't like accountability. You should always be a little cautious. You know what I mean? They don't want to be tracked. They don't want to have goals. They don't want to. Yeah. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. In fact, one of my team said something, and I wrote it down at the time because it was so profound. And what she said was that transparency is the first casualty of embezzlement.
Wow. Say more about that. So what does that mean to you today?
Well, what it means is if I'm a dental staff member and you are the dentist and you ask me a question, I should want you to see my integrity and to see that I know my job, and you know that you pick the right person. I mean, that if I'm honest, that should be what I want to do. On the other hand, if I'm not honest, what I want to do is obfuscation. And you know, you're going to ask me questions and you're going to get circular answers, or you know, the kind of subtle message that, doctor, this is far too complicated for you to understand. And, you know, why don't you just go back in your operatory and do some great dentistry and I'll look after this.
Wow.
So, you know, the lack of transparency, the lack of forthrightness, if that's a word, when I'm glad you nodded because I wasn't sure.
I'm terrible at English, so it doesn't even matter.
If, you know, the unwillingness to show you what I did and why I did it. Yeah, that's a warning sign.
Yeah. So we're talking about best practices today. And as I listen to you, because you're brilliant, what you're really pointing to, and tell me if I'm wrong, is this is more about the who than the how type of a thing. Like once you find the right person who knows they're going to be accountant, they like to show you, because a lot of dentists get caught up on the how. How am I going to do this? How am I going to? And so we said this earlier, drug testing would be an important thing. You're also going to be doing a better job. If you guys haven't listened to my previous podcast with David on hiring, listen to the whole thing. And one of the things you said was, we're looking for the job that isn't listed on the resume. So if they pass the drug test, you know, like you do all your homework, you get them in, they like accountability, they like transparency. Are we 50% there or not?
Yeah, we probably are.
Okay.
I mean, there are really no control measures that can force somebody who's dishonest at the front desk of a dental practice to be honest. You know, if you hire somebody who is inherently a thief, it's a ticking time bomb. And, you know, you can't watch everything that would need to be watched to prevent that. So it's kind of like dentistry. I mean, as a patient, the best money I can spend on dentistry is on hygiene, right? It has, you know, if I kind of measure return on the dollars I spend on dentistry, hygiene's the highest.
Wow.
You know, and everything else that a dentist has to do to me is more expensive and more intrusive, and you know, for the most part, it's preventable. And I'll say the same thing here. It is far easier, cheaper, and more likely to preserve your stomach lining if you can avoid hiring the wrong people. But then beyond that, we need to consider that not every embezzlement is attributable to a bad hiring decision. And as you point out, in some cases, you don't even get to make the decision. I mean, you bought a practice and there are 6 staff and now they're your 6 staff. So what do we do in that case? And the first thing is, as I say, we need to supervise that day-end process that staff do and a lot of dentists don't really understand. And we need to make sure that the amount that gets deposited is the amount that should have been deposited according to the practice management software. And I've added that phrase a couple of times, and let's talk about what it means.
Okay.
How hard is it to get practice management software to lie? And I'm going to only partially answer the question. I'm not going to talk about how it happens because, as you pointed out earlier on, we need to keep this educational for the right people and not the wrong people. But what are the generic problems that allow people to make software misrepresent how much money the practice actually took in? It astounds me when I go into a practice, and I see this a fair bit, where there's what I call the Unicode. And what I mean by the Unicode is everybody in the practice has the same password in the software.
Oh, yes.
And what that means, Kirk, is that everybody has administrative privileges. And what that means is everybody can more or less rewrite history anytime they darn well please.
That is so true. And so you're a big fan of everybody having their own passwords. I mean, no different than having a key card. You can see when people went in and went out of the building, type of a thing.
Everybody needs their own. I'm going to take it a step further. What I suggest for doctors is that they actually create 2 user accounts. They have one that's an administrator account, and they have a second account that has the same amount of privileges roughly as their receptionist. And 90% of what the doctor does in the software can be done with that receptionist level account. So that's the one you log in as.
Yes.
And what that means is if you have to walk away from your workstation because a hygiene patient needs to be checked and you don't think to log out on the way, that what you're logged in as is not a Superman password. It's the same level as your receptionist. What happens in a lot of practices is the doctor ends up walking away from their terminal. They don't have the timeout setting set so that the terminal locks in a minute or two. They walk away and they're logged in as administrator, which means as a staff member, I can go in and, for example, elevate my own user privileges. It also astounds me the doctors who share their password with the staff. Some staff member says, "Doctor, I need to do something and I can't do it. What? Can you give me your password?" And a surprising percentage of them do. Or they use the same there are people who use the same password for everything.
Mm-hmm.
They have one password.
Yeah.
And they use it for everything. And then what happens next is that, somebody else, the office is buying stuff through the doctor's Amazon account, which means, somebody knows the password to that. And they say to themselves, I wonder if the doctor uses that exact same password in the practice management software. And they go and try it and Shazam, I've got the keys to the kingdom.
Wow.
So, I get asked the question a lot about, what practice management software is secure? What's more secure than others? And whenever anybody asks, I say the same thing. Now, you're asking the wrong question. It's not which hammer is better than the other hammer. It's who's the better carpenter.
Wow.
Right. The problem with the software is called DOCTOR. Most software comes out of the box pretty secure.
Right.
And then people in the practice do things to undermine it.
Right.
Just back to the financial topic though, the other thing I will tell every doctor is you must, whatever else you do, you must look at the day-end report from your software.
Okay. And what am I looking for when I pull that report?
You're looking for a lot of things. First of all, you're looking for clerical errors. And when you think of the way that CDT codes work, there are a lot of similar codes. Like, the difference between a 3-service composite filling and a 4-service is 1 digit. And also probably $180. So one of the things you're looking at is just the possibility of a clerical error. Somebody inadvertently downgraded your 4-service filling that you actually did to a 3-service. I got a call from a dentist 100 years ago, and he thought that somebody was embezzling because he just didn't, his bank account wasn't growing as quickly as it should have been. What I realized was that no radiography was being billed on any work done in the hygiene chairs.
Oh.
And it was just a little miscommunication between the hygienists and the front desk people. And this is kind of back in the days of paper charts. And there was about 80 grand a year that was just kind of vanishing because of this. And, which is an interesting story in itself. But the real problem was the doctor wasn't looking at his day end report. Had he looked at it, I'm pretty sure he would have noticed that, there were 100% of the patients in the hygiene chair were escaping without having any film taken. And the first question I asked him was, well, is your radiography up to date? And he said, I am obsessive about that. Like, if I go into a hygiene operatory and, there aren't fresh x-rays there, the hygienist is going to hear about it.
Yeah.
So the films are being taken, they just weren't being billed. And, if you don't look at that report, that kind of stuff will happen. And a lot of teaching your software to lie is visible on that report if you only look at it.
Yeah. Now I have so many, like even today's COVID turned things upside down. Are there any new things we should be aware of? Were there things that you noticed in the pandemic that made it extra weird now?
Yeah, there are a few things. First of all, there was a period of time when a lot of doctors furloughed their staff. And they were suddenly in the practice doing a bunch of things that normally staff would have done, like entering payments into software. And we got a lot of calls in kind of May, June from people who said, yeah, I'm suddenly a little more immersed in my practice management software than I have been in the past. And, I'm seeing something that doesn't look right. So there was some of that. The other thing I'll say is people steal for 2 reasons. Sometimes it's kind of ego-based. So it's somebody who feels like they're undercompensated and, the doctor's taking home millions and, it's all because of my efforts. These folks kind of look at their doctor as a high-functioning moron with good hands. And, it just seems a little unfair to these people that the doctors make in their perception a lot of money. And we know this too. Almost every staff member overestimates how much their doctor takes home.
Yes.
So, it's a perceived inequity that might be bigger than the real one. And so these people are stealing to address an ego deficit. The other group steal because they're 2 months behind in their mortgage payment. They're about to lose their house. And one of the things we have to understand about COVID is that it has created massive displacement through our economy. And there are a lot more people in that position than there were a year ago. So, if you have somebody whose spouse works for an airline or a restaurant or, any of the millions of entities that have had their earnings disrupted and had to furlough their employees. I'm not saying that every one of these people will solve their newfound financial problems by stealing.
Right.
But some of them will.
Yeah. That is so true.
So we need to be aware that, there are some people right now with a precarious existence. And as I say, some percentage of them, and I couldn't tell you what that percentage is, but some percentage of them will view helping themselves to the money coming into the practice as the solution to their problem.
Yeah. Now, I love this stuff and I want you to keep us on the rail with true best practices, but give us some around the mail. I've heard this, this is a huge tiger for a lot of dentists to take, not only with bills, with payments coming in, like any best practices around what to do with the mail.
Absolutely. A couple of things I'll say. First of all, the importance of the mail is probably diminishing over time for most practices. And, when you think about things like bank statements, banks almost hate to send that stuff in the mail now. In fact, my bank actually charges you a different fee.
Right.
They charge you a higher fee if you want paper statements than if you just agreed to electronic ones. So when we say mail, let's broaden our thinking to include email or electronically sent statements. And the first thing I tell dentists about this problem is you need to make sure that you are the first person who sees this stuff. So your bank statement or your monthly bill from Henry Schein should come to you and not a staff member.
Right.
And of course, you need a private email address. Like most practices have sort of some email addresses that are shared with staff, like office at drkirkbehrendt.com and things like that. But doctor absolutely needs their own private email address. And anybody who's sending an electronic statement should be sending it to that email address and not to one that the staff see.
Great point.
So start there. The second thing is when you get that statement from the bank, don't forward the email that it came to your staff member. If your office manager is going to take the bank statement and do a bank reconciliation, for example, which I'm not in favor of, but if that's what's going to happen, or the Henry Schein bill, if that's going to the assistant who did the ordering, don't just forward the email to them. Open the attachment. It's typically a PDF file, and send the PDF.
Okay, so I'm save
your own email
to my desktop and then use the email that the team members. So normally,
in other words, if you send a staff member a forwarded email,
she's going to see the email that you're using.
Well, she's going to know that anyway. But what she's also going to conclude is the doctor never looked at this. It just came into their email and they didn't open it or anything, and they just forwarded it to me. So, they whatever scrutiny they want me to believe is taking place is not. If you open the PDF and you send it from your PDF reader through the mail, now it strips off all the stuff that it came with. What somebody's going to realize is the truth, that you opened that PDF and had a look at it.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So I'll mention that. One other caution that I'll give to doctors, and we've seen a lot of this in the past year. A lot of practices increasingly are buying things from Amazon. And of course, when you have an Amazon account and you have a credit card tied to it, there's no restriction on what you can buy. In other words, Amazon's not going to call you and say, I see you're running a dental practice here, but you just ordered a bicycle. Okay. It is all highly automated at their end.
And you can send it anywhere you want.
So something that doesn't necessarily dawn on a lot of doctors is if you have an Amazon account, once in a while, you need to look at the past orders, and Amazon keeps all that stuff. You can find what you ordered 5 years ago if you want.
Yeah.
But take a look through it. You can see what the delivery addresses were, and you can see what was bought.
Yeah. I do that to audit my kids. I have to do that once a week. Just who the heck bought that? If you catch them, because if you don't catch kids, they keep ordering.
Yeah. And people in dental practices aren't all that different.
Right.
Yeah. So, just as friendly advice to doctors, have a look at that Amazon account and
great point.
Just just see what's been ordered and where it's gone. And, we wrapped up a case the other day where somebody had milked the Amazon account to about the extent of $40,000 over a year.
Wow.
And of course, that was not their only game either. So, that was just that one facet of what they had done.
Yeah. Now, other things too, we're talking about best financial practices. Anything you would say, let's say I'm a dentist that participates a lot with insurance. Are there any nuances, anything I should know with insurances, like best practices?
Yeah, there are a couple of things I'll say here. First of all, if your insurance if you're in network with the insurance, in other words, if we're talking about PPO stuff, almost inevitably there are adjustments that need to be made. In other words, if you think about what practice management software does, it bills everybody typically at what's called your UCR fee, usual, customary, and reasonable. So, you do a crown and your UCR is $720. Every time that CDT code is entered, your system will clock up $720. If a particular insurance company has contracted with you that they will pay $500 for a crown, now the problem that your office has is that we have the patient owing $720, whereas between the patient and the insurance, we need to get that down to $500. So there's a requirement to make what's called an adjustment. And that's fine. It's part of doing business with insurance companies. However, it's also licensed for staff to replace payments with adjustments and pocket money. So that needs to be the focus of every doctor when they're doing what I said they have to do at the end of each day, which is look at their practice management software report, because adjustments will show up on that report and they need to review them and make sure that, first of all, empirically they make sense.
Right.
In other words, there should not be a $220 adjustment on a $280 fee. That doesn't make sense. And the second thing is to insist that the software be set up for very specific adjustments. In other words, if we're in 3 PPOs, we should have one code that's adjustment Delta Dental. We should have a different code that's adjustment Sigma and a different code that's adjustment Humana.
That is such a great, because we often see just one, they're all parceled into one thing.
Yeah. And it's back to what you said about accountability or transparency. If I'm stealing, I want one code, because it's a lot harder when there's just one code to look at an individual transaction and decide if it's legitimate or not. One of my staff also says, because there are also other adjustment codes that you need. If you're a specialist, you need a code for treating your referral sources, because you're going to certainly eat those fees or knock them way down, and you need a code for that. There's probably a kind of a customer relations code that you use, for the poor woman whose crown breaks twice. And you end up and has to come back a bunch of times before finally the lab gets it right. So there's a code for that. And then there's a miscellaneous code for all the other things. And what my staff member says is the rule needs to be, if that miscellaneous code is ever used, somebody needs to put in a lot of explanation about why they use that.
Yeah, that is a great point too.
So, you're looking at the adjustments and you see a miscellaneous. Now you need to look for the explanation and decide if it makes sense. And if there's no explanation on a miscellaneous code, the first time somebody gets warned, the second time they get fired. So that's something else that I want the doctor to look at. And in terms of dealing with insurance, you need codes that are sufficiently specific that you can look at it and decide if it makes sense or not.
Yeah.
And when somebody uses that one blanket code for everything, it's very hard to do that.
Yeah. That is really good to know. So again, forgive me for all my questions, because I love this stuff. I have often found with teenagers, it's very good to be random, Do you know what I mean? Like to not be super predictable. Like I've even heard my daughter say upstairs, no, we can't do that. My dad's totally unpredictable. I don't know if he, you know what I mean? Like, and I've heard dentists say that's a good component. It's a best practice. Like you just don't know if he's going to come up and take the deposits. That you just never know. Like he's got his own system or she's got so dentists tend to be creatures of habit. What would you say about that? Is that true? Not true? I mean,
it depends on the frequency of the action. So if once a year I take the deposit to the bank, and my staff just aren't sure which day it's going to be, I'm not sure how much of a deterrent that's going to be to somebody doing something weird. You know, if it's more like once a week and it's unpredictable, that might have some impact. You know, but the vague notion that you might look at something probably isn't going to do it.
yeah.
The other thing I'll say to dentists, though, about the whole concept of, you know, grabbing a particular piece for further scrutiny is try to get direct as opposed to indirect information.
What does that mean? Tell me what that means.
Well, let's say that you see an adjustment that doesn't look right to you. I'm not sure the best next step will be to go to the staff member who made it and ask them a question. There are other sources of information. For example, the patient ledger, the patient master file will tell you, you know, you see an adjustment that's a delta dental, it's coded as a delta dental adjustment. You can look in the patient's file and see if they're actually a delta patient or not.
Wow.
Which is a whole lot better than simply asking a staff member. And I go back to what I said earlier about the knowledge gap and thinking that because you asked a staff member and you got an answer that you're fine. You know, it astounds me. And again, we're talking about financial best practices here. It astounds me how unfamiliar most dentists are with their practice management software. And this thing is more important to your financial well-being than your handpiece is. And yet every dentist knows their handpiece like it's their child.
Right.
And they go to practice management software and it's like, this is a foreign language.
So how proficient do I need to be in the software if I'm a dentist? I mean, should I know a lot of it, the basics, everything?
The intent here is not to make you a clone of your receptionist.
Okay.
In other words, there's a lot of stuff that they do that you probably don't really need to know how to do. What you should know how to do, though, is print reports yourself. You should know what the reports mean. You should know which ones you look at and which ones aren't terribly interesting to you. You should be able to look at a patient's ledger and make sense of it. And in case anybody's wondering, well, what the heck is a ledger? It's kind of the list of all the transactions that have happened on a specific patient. So the ledger will show treatment, it will show payments, and it will show adjustments. You need to be able to look at a patient's master file. So this is the part that has their name and their address and who their insurance is. You know, whether they're linked to any family members, that kind of stuff. So it's not that you need to know as much as your front desk people. You don't. But what you need to know is a little bit different. You know, the same as there's a different set of skills for driving the car as opposed to doing a brake job on the car.
Right.
You don't need to know how to do the brake job, but to drive a car, there are certain things about it you need to understand. You know, like when I step on the gas, this is what happens.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say the same thing here. You can't just ignore this piece of software in your practice and feel like it really belongs to your staff. It doesn't.
Right. And again, as you're saying all these, I'm having like flashbacks. I was in New York and the guy didn't know how to turn on the computer. I'm like, you don't know how to turn on? He couldn't get into QuickBooks and he couldn't turn on the computer. I'm like,
yeah,
boy, That's step number one. Then he pulled the receivables report and couldn't believe it was over $1 million. I'm like, okay, that's.
And of course, what came across loudly to you from that was that he never looked at the damn thing before.
No, just kept working.
Yeah. And, if my chair's full, I'll be okay.
Yeah.
Or, how can I possibly be overdrawn at the bank? I still have checks, I still have blank checks in my checkbook.
I just write on them and it works,
Yeah, it's magic.
Yeah.
So, again, I understand that very few people in the audience chose this field because business ownership was really the thing they wanted in life. I mean, to every dentist I've ever met, it's kind of the unwanted stepchild in the bargain of becoming a dentist.
So true.
But it's not going away. Yep. It's not like there's going to be a COVID that hits computers and you come into your practice one morning and they're all gone. That's not going to happen, for the rest of your career, whether it's 2 years or 30 years. That practice management software is going to be really important to you. So let's acknowledge that and quit hoping that it just disappears one day.
Yeah, absolutely. So you and I are going to do a regular series because I want to talk about embezzlement outside of the office. I've heard of all this stuff of dentists with Bitcoin and their computers locking up, all that. We'll talk about that at another time. But when it comes, let's go back to inside the practice, best practices. Any last things you would add that are just good things to do to prevent bad things from happening when it comes to financial practices?
I'll go back to what you said, and you didn't attribute the quote, but I think you were probably quoting Ronald Reagan when you said trust but verify.
Yeah, I don't know who said it, but I use it all the time.
Yeah, it was President Reagan who said that about the Russians, and it's hard to be a dentist and be skeptical. Those two things don't seem to easily coexist. And as many or more dentists than I do, Kirk, and you know what we're dealing with. They are wonderful, altruistic, caring, loving people. And, the way I put it once is that most of them would do dentistry for free if their CPA would let them.
Yep.
And, what I'm asking is hard, and I know that it's hard. But when you hire somebody and you're faced with that challenge of just trying to find the right person who's going to be the perfect fit, for the personalities in the office and that sparkling person that makes you enjoy your work, at the same time that you're looking for that, you also have to say to yourself, okay, but wait a minute. What if everything they're telling me is not true? When you're working with staff about money, what you have to remember is that your interest and theirs aren't parallel. There are times when they have to make a choice between you or them. One thing we see a fair amount of is bonus manipulation. So dentist puts in place a bonus plan, and the first question staff ask is, how do we optimize what we get from the bonus plan? And of course, one way is to do what we're supposed to do, and keep the doctor's chair full and bill properly and, be smart about insurance. And, when the person phones and tries to cancel on short notice, to sort of try to talk them out of it. All those things that are sort of pro practice. That's one way to optimize the bonus. And the other way is to manipulate the numbers. So if there's a threshold bonus, where if the office brings in $150,000 this month, everybody gets a bonus, then what staff do fairly quickly, around the 20th of the month, they get together and they sort of say, okay, so where's the bonus this month? Is it a slam dunk, or is it, there's no way it's going to happen, or we're sort of in the middle? And if we're in the middle, we'll do all those things I just talked about. We'll pull together, we'll collect the money that's owing, and we'll make sure the bonus happens. If it's hopeless, let's start postponing collections so that next month looks better.
Oh.
And if it's a slam dunk, if the bonus happens at 150,000, there's no real point in our collecting 180,000. we may as well postpone that last 30,000 until next month so that we get a head start, we get a good chance of getting next month's bonus as well. So, people are self-interested creatures.
Yeah.
And it's hard for dentists to remember that and to govern themselves based on that certainty. But everybody works in their own self-interest.
Right. Now, I want to go back to what we said earlier. Our goal here is always to make education fun. This is a great profession. And certainly you and I talking isn't to discourage anybody or to create more fear or lower the trust. We just see it too often where good people let something happen that shouldn't have happened, and it destroys them emotionally more than financially for a very long time, where they can't even trust sometimes their own spouse, or the wreckage goes beyond the money. Wouldn't you agree? Like way beyond the money.
It absolutely does. And, I admire the heck out of dentists because emotionally I could not do what they do.
Right.
I just couldn't emotionally handle their job. And I have unbounded admiration for the people who do it and love it and, do great things for their patients and their community and their family.
Right.
And I hate to see those people get taken advantage of simply because they believe the best in everybody.
I agree. It affects how they communicate at home with their patients, everything. And it's the unintended consequences. And so the purpose of this is, and David, I'm going to have you back again and again and again, is just put some proper protocols in place, just best practices, like the password, the Unicode one. Didn't even think of that. The adjustment codes, we know that, but I see it way too much that it's one code. There's so many components that you could easily just put in place that'll prevent a lot of pain. And so I want people to check out your book. I have a copy of your book. I want you to tell them what your book is about, where to find it. You guys also have a webinar series. So let's start with the book first. How do I get a copy of your book?
The book's on Amazon. It's called Dental Embezzlement, The Art of Theft and the Science of Control, which pretty much mirrors our conversation today. It's available in either paperback or Kindle. And if you go to Amazon and just search for Dental Embezzlement, it'll show up. It's not a hard read. It's about 120 pages and it's, I hope, pretty conversational and just some real basic fundamental advice there. I'm working on my next book now, which is going to be a little bit bigger and a little bit more comprehensive. And I don't really have a timetable for that, but I hope it'll be around by about the summer.
Awesome. I would always, I type like this. I tried writing a book one time. It took me forever. We'll have a separate one on how to write a book. You're going to have to teach me how to do that. Now talk about your company too. Like, I love your company, a lot of my clients, our clients, and they love it. What do you guys do? And how do I get a hold of you if I'm even thinking something weird might be happening in my office?
The company's called Prosperident, and we really do two things. We work with dentists who have found embezzlement or they have embezzlement concerns. And we also help people set the proper systems in place to protect them. So that's what we do. We're not hard to find at all. You can go to our website, and once I tell people the name, they won't forget it. It's www.dentalembezzlement.com. And the only trick in all that is spelling embezzlement correctly. But your audience are smart people; they'll figure it out. Or they can call us at our toll-free number, which is 888-398-2327.
Yeah.
888-398-2327.
Yeah. And I'll just say, if you're a listener, David is a great human being. He's brilliant. He's always just a great resource to have, in your speed dial. Well, you don't even do speed dial, or your contacts, whatever. Just, you guys also do a webinar series. I know you've gotten, tell us what your webinar series is and how do I get signed up for your webinars?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do a webinar once a month. They're on Thursday nights. They all start at 8 p.m. Eastern time. The theme for the next 3 months is designing your post-COVID practice. So we've got 3 coming up, January 21st, February 18th, and March 25th. and each one has a little different theme, but it's all about looking forward and making 2021 a whole lot better than 2020 was for most of you. So the first webinar is on January 21st, and we're really just going to talk about the opportunities out there right now and how to take advantage of some of them. So I have a couple of my team who host these with me, and we do occasionally bring in guests. And before we went live today, I was talking with Kirk about being a guest, and we're going to make that happen really soon because he's got just some incredible ideas on how to run a better practice. So we really look forward to that part, and that we'll be making an announcement about that very soon.
Well, that's very kind of you. I feel like I learned more from you than I could ever offer, but I'm so happy.
I think there's a lot you can teach me, and a heck of a lot you can teach our audience.
We're all in this together to figure out how to create just a better way to do things. Now, I would love to have you back over and over and over again just to cover another component, because I know you have an incredible wealth of knowledge around what's happening, what to do, and we'll definitely do that. So I'd love to have you back again and again. What do you think?
Anytime.
Awesome. Well, buddy, I really appreciate this. Stick around while we say goodbye to everybody else. I want to thank you for being just on here and sharing your wealth of knowledge. I also want to thank you if you're listening to the Best Practices Show podcast. If you enjoyed today, which I know you did, just do us a favor, hit the share button, share with your friends. Keep sending us suggestions for shows that you want to see, whether it be from David or other guests. We'll line all those up. We have an incredible calendar for this next year coming up because we just want to make sure you're getting the most out of this. And until we see you next time, keep watching the Best Practices Show. You guys enjoy the rest of your day.